Hello everybody, this is Johns Hopkins with Baltimore Heritage, and we're back with another of our 5-Minute Histories videos. And today I'm over in Fells Point, right on the water, just off of Thames Street. And behind me is the Frederick Douglass Isaac Myers Maritime Museum. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but it has a ring, and it's a fabulous place that tells the stories of Black maritime history and how they've shaped Baltimore and America. And that's mostly what we're going to talk about today. But I thought I'd start by getting our bearings, to use a nautical term, a little bit on where we are. The Maritime Museum is centered around an 1840s era warehouse. We think it's probably the oldest commercial building on Baltimore's waterfront, on a wharf that for 200 years or so has been called Chase's Wharf. But we are going to start our story even a little bit before that, back to the days before when we declared our independence from Great Britain, the 1760s. And we're going to start with an enterprising lady named Anne Fell. Anne married into the Fell family and into a fortune of real estate. They owned hundreds, close to 1,000 acres along the Patapsco River here. And Anne's husband, Edward, had a dream of turning this into a maritime community. The only problem was he was really slow at it, and he died early before he got much done. But at his death, Anne went into overdrive, and she was clearly really good at it. She laid out streets, she plotted out parcels of land to sell, and she marketed the daylights out of this area as the next big thing to buy a house or start a trading business in. The Fells Point that we know today is largely stemming from her efforts back beginning in the 1760s. Part of those efforts involved parcels number 53 and 54. She sold those in 1767 to a gentleman named Hercules Courtney. What a fabulous name, Hercules. He bought it and built a wharf on it. For the next 30 years, a number of other owners expanded the wharf. And then by the late 1700s, a gentleman named Thorndike Chase. Thorndike, another great name. We have a Hercules and a Thorndike. Thorndike Chase bought the wharf and really did something with it. He built his own house here. He built a number of warehouses, including in the 1840s, the warehouse that's behind me. The Chase family owned the parcel for a number of years, but in the 1870s sold it to the B&O Railroad. The B&O used it for a number of things, but largely coffee. We were the third biggest importer of coffee beans back then, and they used this wharf here and this warehouse mostly for a company called the Levering Coffee Company that had started in Baltimore in 1866. They had a famous coffee brand called the Lord Calvert that had the wonderful jingle back then of "Every sip is delicious." After the Levering Company was bought up by a firm in Pennsylvania and stopped shipping coffee, the B&O used the warehouse to store all sorts of things, from lumber to ship's products and whatnot. Interestingly, many people call this the sugar warehouse, but it's funny that one thing that it likely never stored was sugar. As far as we can tell, in the 1980s, a real sugar warehouse nearby was torn down, and everybody just sort of transferred the name over to this one. But people call it the Sugar Warehouse today. By the 1990s, a company called the Constellation Real Estate Group, which was a subdivision of BG&E, owned this parcel, and it had a horrible fire in 1993. With the urging of local preservationists, Constellation did not tear it down, but stabilized it. They didn't fix it up, but they at least stabilized it. And by the late 1990s, the nonprofit organization Living Classrooms purchased it, restored this building, and created the Maritime Museum. So let's turn to that now that we know where we are kind of physically. What about the two names of the folks that the museum is named after, Frederick Douglass and Isaac Myers? Each could have an hour-long video easily on their own. We're going to try to do it in 90 seconds. Douglass, of course, was born enslaved on the Eastern Shore, named Frederick Bailey, changed his name to Douglass later on. He unsuccessfully tried to escape to his freedom as a teenager, and then was transferred here to Baltimore to work as a ship's caulker. Ship's caulkers basically took hemp that had been coated in tar and stuffed it into the cracks of ships to try to keep them watertight. He worked alongside other black ship's caulkers, and white ship's caulkers. And as a somewhat aside, there is a wonderful partnership between a group called the Friends of the Ship's Caulkers Houses and the Preservation Society of Fells Point, restoring two wonderful old houses nearby nearby on Wolf Street, telling the story of black ship's caulkers in the process. We'll put a link for that. But back to Douglas, he eventually does escape his enslavement here with the help of a woman named Anna Murray. She was a free black person living in Baltimore. She became his wife later, but first what she did was sew him a U.S. Navy uniform and then buy him a train ticket to New York. He convinced the conductor that everything was legitimate, and when he got to New York, well, he eventually became probably the nation's most prominent and influential abolitionist and civil rights advocate. So that's Douglas. Who was Isaac Myers? He also was a ship's caulker, born free here in Baltimore in 1835, worked alongside white ship's caulkers and black ship's caulkers. But after the Civil War, white ship's caulkers were trying to push the black caulkers out of the business to try to create more jobs for themselves. And Myers reacted to that with a couple colleagues by creating what was called the Colored Caulkers Trade Union Society, trying to unionize black ship's caulkers. It was successful, and in 1866, he and a few colleagues raised $10,000, an enormous sum, from black families in Baltimore to buy a parcel of land nearby that had a railroad and a ship operation on it. They created a company called the Chesapeake Marine Railway and Dry Dock Company, and within a few months were employing 300 ship's caulkers. They got a number of big contracts, and they became the largest black-owned ship repair business in America. That launched Myers onto the national scene. He helped found an organization, actually the first national black labor union, called the Colored National Labor Union, and he became its first president. As an aside, the second president was none other than Frederick Douglass, his fellow ship caulker here in Fells Point. Back in Baltimore, Myers had a long and successful career, both as a businessman, but also helping other black families in the process. He founded a group called the Colored Businessmen's Association of Baltimore, the Colored Building and Loan Association, among others. When he died in 1891, he left a long legacy of innovation in business, in philanthropy, and civil rights that we all are benefiting from today. So that's who those two gentlemen were. So in the late 1990s, when Living Classrooms Foundation, that works with kids here in Baltimore, purchased the property with the vision of telling black maritime history, they looked really close by to two giants in that field, Frederick Douglass and Isaac Myers, as really the framework to build around. I'm going to wrap up and say that if you have not been down here to the museum, it is more than worth it. You can learn about Douglass and Myers and their contributions to Baltimore and America. You can learn what it was like to be a ship's caulker, a black ship's caulker here 150 years ago. And if you come during lunchtime or dinner time, you can eat at the water's edge, literally at a wonderful restaurant that's in this building called Ampersea. All right, thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.